Good morning, everyone. I hope my voice is going to be okay. I have overused it a bit maybe, or it's a bit too weak, but we'll see what happens. I had a nightly lecture yesterday and it was 2 hours of talking. This is Heidegger 1536, and I will take up Gematria, chirality and ordinality. I have found an interesting connection in these different areas. How can I put it? Just to give you a clue, and I will expand the idea later in the summary, about 45-50 minutes. Remember how we earlier mentioned the circle, how we go back full circle from where we started. And the vortex or spiral is questioning the idea of coming back to the exact same spot, sort of nullification or zeroing out. The ordinal numbers do never come back to the same spot. They are truly ordered. Whereas the cardinal numbers seem to erode or generalize away order. In so doing, a lot of important understanding obviously disappears. The order is first, and the order of looking into letters and alphabets is done once, thereby being significant. I will start with an article to get warmed up into the subject. It's by Domenic, Marbaniang, 2014. God in Graphology. And the abstract sums it up. Let us call the method of trying to decode the writing system in order to seek proofs for faith as graphological theology. Sacred Gematria. The works of Ivan Panin that discovered numeric patterns in the Bible are examples of textual gematria. Check the following excerpt from his letter to the New York Sun. The first 17 verses of the New Testament contain the genealogy of the Christ. It consists of 2 main parts. Verses 1 to 11 cover the period from Abraham, the father of the chosen people, to the captivity, when they ceased as an independent people. Verses 12 to 17 cover the period from the captivity to the promised deliverer, the Christ. let us examine the first part of this genealogy. Its vocabulary has 49 words, or 7 times 7. This numbers is itself 7. 7 sevens, and the sum of its factor is 2 sevens. Of these 49 words, 28 or 4 sevens begin with a vowel, and 21 or 3 sevens begin with a consonant. Again, these 49 words of the vocabulary have 266 letters, or 7 times 2 times 19. This number is itself 38 sevens, and the sum of its factors is 28 or 4 sevens, while the sum of its figures is 14 or 2 sevens. Of these 266 letters, moreover 140 or 27s are vowels, and 126 or 18 sevens are consonants. That is to say, just as the number of words in the vocabulary is a multiple of 7, so is the number of letters a multiple of 7. Just as the sum of the factors of the number of the words is a multiple of 7, so is the sum of the factors of the number of the letters a multiple 7. And just as the number of words is divided between vowel words and consonants words by sevens, so is the number of letters divided between vowels and consonants by sevens. There has certainly been criticism that Panning was creating the patterns arbitrarily, and if we look for, we can find numerical patterns anywhere. However, this doesn't diminish the fact that Gematria has been used as an apologetical tool in graphological theology. Sorry, my poor throat. is important here that we look into is the idea of planning, creating the patterns arbitrarily. If we look that way from the viewpoint of cardinality. Theology of the alphabet, Hadabar. Jewish mystics have maintained that God created the universe from the 22 consonants of the Hebrew alphabet, called the Otiyod Yeshod, the foundational letters. A theology of alphabet would contend for the sacredness of the alphabet's origin in God. An even more intense form of this would lead to the mysticism of the alphabet. Check the following comment on Genesis 1. Quote, after Bereshit bara Elohim, there is a fourth untranslatable word. That fourth word is actually two Hebrew letters, the Aleph and the Tau. The Aleph Tau does serve a grammatical purpose in that it points to the direct object of the sentence. These two letters do not actually form a word, but rather they express an understanding. The Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the Tau is the last letter of the alphabet. The placement of these two very significant letters at strategic locations within many sentences of the Hebrew scriptures express a total completeness. It is equivalent to saying from Alpha to Omega, to A to Z. From the last, from the beginning to the end. So from the Hebrew point of view, they see that in the beginning, Elohim created the Aleph Tau. In other words, they believe that the very first thing Elohim created was the Hebrew alphabet, which is known through ancient writings also as the Aleph Tau. They recognize that he created the letters by which all life and all physical things spring forth from. They are divinely ordained building blocks of life, from mysteries and hidden truths within the alphabet. However, the Bible doesn't seem to support the prioritizing of any particular language as such. The Bible was also written in Aramaic and Greek, and Jesus in the New Testament actually declares himself to be the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. Alpha is the first, Omega is the last letter of the Greek alphabet. So we go on to the next, Genesis in Chinese characters. But this may not be limited to just Hebrew or Arabic. Studies in the Chinese characters have been used as proofs for the reliability of the Bible by Chinese scholars. Check the following two excerpts from C.H. Kang's The Discovery of Genesis. It defies reading because there are many symbols. But in this example, the Genesis is found out by adding the symbols and see how they come together to make out a whole character, whole Chinese character. It's very similar. Again, the validity of such interpretations has been debated. One counter-argument has been that such interpretations are very literalist and do not do justice to the intent of the character composition. It has been argued that though the characters were ultimately derived from pictograms, when they became used for writing, they ceased to be pictographic, and that most of the Chinese characters have both phonetic and signific categories. For example, bringing together the characters for woman and horse makes mother, that the sound ma is borrowed from horse. While the component meaning woman hints that the character has something to do with women, the component meaning in horse in fact establishes pronunciation. Both the mother and horse morphemes are pronounced ma, albeit with different tones. But the fact that the contextual apologists were looking at the ultimate derivative beyond the surface usage is certainly not discounted. next subtitle is Philosophy of the Word. The all-encompassing syllable. And now we move to the Indian tradition. Verse 1-2 of the Taittiriya Upanishad's 4th chapter describes the sacred syllable Om as preeminent in the Vedas. That pervades all words and that emerged from the immortal Vedas as their quintessence. The Mandukya Upanishad exposes Om as the beginning, middle, and end of all sound. It encompasses all the sounds beginning with the opening of the mouth with the sound A, then closing to the middle U, and then closing down with Ma. Aum. The Upanishads encourage the recital of Om before every incantation of prayer. Check the poetic motif of Om in this beautiful prayer of the Badaranyaka Upanishad. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mityor Ma Amitam Gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. The Hindus have long looked at Om as the beginning and the end of all reality. It has become the religious symbol of Hinduism. Practical Hindu mysticism values incantation and utterance of Om as encompassing all things, including all quarters of space and time. Interestingly, the Indian concept of Om seems to be a bit parallel to that of the Greek Alpha Omega. However, the philosophical frameworks or meaning in which the terms are used compel difference. Still, the concept of the beginning, middle, end looks interesting, looks inviting to compare it with the phrase who is, who was, and who is to come. Who is, who was, who is to come. Beginning, middle, and end. also the idea of the all-encompassing. Compassing cannot ignore the person in whom all things, both in heaven and on earth, will be gathered together. Yet again, the biblical view is Trinitarian and non-pantheistic, and the human soul is a creature of God. He gives to all life, breath, and all things. In him we live and move and have our being. Next subtitle: All Governing Word. Heraclitus taught that the universe was governed by the Logos, which means word, but may also be interpreted as law or reason. According to Heraclitus, the Logos was fire-like. The Logos was a divine force. The Logos produces the order and pattern discernible in the flux of nature. This, the fourth divine force, is similar to human reason. Excellent phrasing of Heraclitus. And remember this, because I will return to it in connection with order. Church Father Justin Martyr elaborately made use of the Logos theology as an apologetic approach to Greek philosophy and religion. In Christian theology, Logos is the person of Christ. This helped Justin to accept philosophers such as Plato as speaking according to the Word. According to Justin, even before the coming of Christ, the Logos was manifested partially in such Greek philosophers as Socrates and Heraclitus, and in such Hebrews as Abraham, Ananias, Azarias, Misael, Elijah. Plato's truth was dependent on Moses. The seed of God's Logos, Logos spermatikos, was disseminated to all men in their God-given capacity to respond to truth. Whatever things were rightly said among all men are the property of us Christians. There were Christians before Christ, such as Socrates and Heraclitus. All theophanies in the Old Testaments were Christophanis. For the ineffable Father and Lord of all neither comes to any place, but remains in his own place. Similar line of thinking exists in Sikh theology, in which the Savad, that is, the Word, is considered to be the Guru, the teacher. Is graphological theology biblically justifiable? With regard to theology of the text, the Bible does speak about every scripture being inspired, and that every jot and tittle having significance in the Bible. However, there are dangers in emphasizing geometric patterns and disregarding the message of the Spirit for the composition of the Word. God gives us the tree in order to eat of its fruit, not to count its leaves and spend time analyzing its patterns. However, this does not mean that the patterns do not exist. For everything that is God created is God sealed. The same also holds for studies in Chinese characters. It is certainly not very surprising to find bridges and connections to the Bible in local folk stories, rituals, and even graphology. Don Richardson has recorded amazing missionary findings in various cultures all over the world in his very important book, Eternity in the Heart. However, one must be careful not to assume a bridge where a bridge does not exist, or else he may have to walk over thin air. The Chinese findings cannot be discounted as accidental, nor does an argument of phonetic rule away the question of finding the sources of the original characters. God is not just the God of the Hebrews or of the Mayans. He has been historically present among us all from the beginning, and his trails are visible among us. We only need to find them. Traces. We need to find them. I finished the reading there by the article of Domenic Marbaniang, how to pronounce. The features are present everywhere, at every level. I want to bring in here and sort of expand the subject. One feature that comes to the fore here is fractality. Remember, as we've gone through earlier, Terry Mods, Tarlow, Susie Frobel, that in reality and in meaning, things get repeated on different levels, not just one level of, so to speak, interpretation, but a depth. And the depth of everything is much greater than we assume. Going into a text like this is similar to understanding the working of an organism, an animal, a plant, a whole system. And doing that can be done on several levels simultaneously. In fractality, it's the number of levels that give the force of the text. One level alone gives only such force, but can be increased. I guess by this you are well familiar with the Norwegian coast, and that the coastline is not the only factor in what a Norwegian coastline is. The sea is as important, and it is in the complexities that the real coastline comes to fore. Not from a picture of a satellite or a map that erodes the very fine filigranate structures of the coastline. The Holy Bible and scriptures like the Upanishads, the Chinese Old Tao Te Ching, are working on multi-levels, not only one. Each level reinforcing the others to make a complex strong and balanced text. The fractality is what makes up strong features in the world. So gematria is even important. It shows to a deepening and, I would say, widening of understanding, where I don't lock myself in seeing either the Bible extremely superficial, but instead it invites me to engage as a subject. Once more we have the interpenetration of the thinking subject, of our intention, how our subject, which we mentioned the other day, is far greater than just an ego or a self. And when we sort of tune into that, the rhythm of the text, which is in the finer details, just like a concerto by Pachelbel, is both in the small things in the concerto, and then you have an overlay of melodies. In Pachelbel that's very obvious. Up to 20 layers, and for me it took time to even hear them, the depth of it. It makes for a strong compound. It makes for something much more telling and having a stronger message. This is what fractality does. Take a little pause there. So, what do we find in this gematria? My suggestion here is that fractality shows a magnification, gives the overall structure once more. This is literally beginning, middle, and end. It is alpha and omega, aleph and tau, and aum. And as was pointed here, also the sound, how the signs look, are all part of the filigranate, the smaller features of what makes up a complete composite. And from this comes the strength. It's called scale independent. It's a very interesting feature in reality itself. It's gaining force on all levels because of this. So the text, the plant, every thought is in itself, as Susie Frobel showed, a deepening of fractality. All levels are participating. The beginning, the middle, and the end. To be compared with the smallest, the biggest, and the medium. We will go more into the text. I think Kalle here has a comment. As your paper, I'll put that microphone on you. Wait, I'll check that you are. Yeah.
So let me return to the paper. by Domenic Marbaniang, and he quotes Ivan Panin, and I will reread the first part of the quotation from Ivan Panin. The first 70 verses of the New Testament contain the genealogy of the Christ. It consists of two main parts. Verses 1 to 11 cover the period from Abraham, the father of the chosen people, to the captivity, when they ceased as an independent people. Verses 12 to 17 cover the period from the captivity to the promised deliverer, the Christ. Let us examine the first part of this genealogy. Its vocabulary has 49 words, or 7 multiplied by 7. This number is in itself 7 sevens, and some of its factors is 2 sevens, etc., etc., etc. And then again, these 49 words of the vocabulary have 266 letters, etc., etc. So my objection to Ivan Panin's method is that he assumes implicitly that all manuscripts look alike. In fact, there are hardly any manuscripts that look alike. He assumes he takes, I suppose he has taken a Greek New Testament edition and taken that as a model. But if you look at the manuscripts, they differ. There are hardly any manuscripts that look alike. There's always one word. It can be a small conjunction that differs, or a little letter that is a variation in spelling. So 260 letters. What do you do? Then I would say that the Greek manuscripts are more like the Norwegian coastline, or any coastline for that matter. It's always fluctuating. That's what is life. It changes. A coastline that doesn't change its shore is a very strange coastline. That's what's life. It changes. That's also with the Bible. Instead, most Bible specialists assume that there is a perfect text somewhere, but that's a very Platonic idea. It's a mistake. Hans and I, we encountered this name Ivan Panin some 2 weeks ago when a priest, Lars, mentioned his name. It was relating to John chapter 21, verse 11, where we are told that they captured 153 fish, and people had done much about this number, what can it mean? So Ivan Panin's name is important in biblical studies, but we have to be cautious how we deal with this. So I think that Marbaniang is correct when he says that we have to look more on this for the spirit, or rather for the fractality of the manuscript. So to say, it depends more on the observer. One observer sees one manuscript, it gives one pattern, another manuscript gives another pattern. Of course there are similarities, but there's also differences. So I give this back to you, Hans.
Thank you very much, Kalle. Thanks for the comment. And I will directly steal the Norwegian coastline comment you made. It's ever changing. Let me see if I can phrase this. This is a tough thought. I think to preserve, so to speak, the vigility, the virility and the vividness of the Norwegian coastline, it needs to change. There's something Terry Marks-Tarlow took up, that it's in the readout, the presencing, as Heidegger calls it, that the important thing is happening. And for that to be able to come forward, change is a necessity. So the truth of the text It's not superficial only, as in what might be classical way of reading, but it is moving, changing, like fractality. So even a misquote, spelling faults are preserving the difference, which is so important for the readout. We mentioned before in the Derrida text of an apocalyptic tone recently adopted in philosophy, where he both praises and lampoons Immanuel Kant, but he does so to show that a mistuning of a string is important for it to come true. And the fixating of an origin, a staticness, can actually obscure the truth. The subject does not get engaged. We mention also many times that actual, what we usually in Newtonian call arbitrariness or chance, like a spelling mistake or mishearing, is something bad, something evil, something that Plato would have casted out as being defect, is instead participatory, important, because the Norwegian coastline and other fractal surfaces read each other out, and fixating on either here, the original, or the copy, you lose what's happening in between. Here is the interesting zest of it. Here is what reality is presenting itself. David Bohm and Pete mention this and calls it the hollow movement, that eternal wave-like folding of the explicit, the text, and the implicit, which is the subject, the error, the arbitrariness, the chance, that invigorates and makes stronger. I come to think a description from, I think, the Chaos book by Gleich, when they made an experiment in Texas. They made a biosphere. They put in plants, weeds, trees, gave them all love and nurture they needed. But they noticed pretty soon that the tree and the plants did not grow strong. They did not get sturdy, thick stems. Instead, they fell over. It turned out the lack of wind, the lack of disturbances, made the integrity weak. It weakened it. So wind is a necessity. The disturbances are part of what makes it possible to read out. A comment before pause? Or if you like.
Yes, indeed. Great example with the tree, that the tree needs resistance. I'm myself working on a paper about the book of Revelation, about different variants. And there is one, the main text reads that Jesus has the key of David to lock, and that's what Jesus locks that can open, and that what he shuts can, and vice versa, that he opens can nobody shut. Anyhow, so there is variant reading that says he has also the key of Hades, but that's only a few manuscripts. Instead of the key of David, he has the key of Hades. But I think you have to have that disturbance, so to say, the Hades reading symbolizes that disturbance that you mentioned, the healthy virus, so to say, virus, how do you pronounce it, virus, that you need in the system to make the manuscript healthy or the text healthy. So you need resistance, you need the wind. So it's a good, the example of the tree from Texas. That's very inspiring. I think I will. Death is itself is the symbol of virus, or vice versa. You need death to make the system healthy. Do you have any other examples where death is a symbol for being healthy? Bacteria, perhaps. When you put in, let me see, bacteria, virus. Bacteria themselves are a symbol of death. You need a little bit death to make the system strong. Back to you, Hans.
Yeah, that's why I was so happy that Marbaniang quoted Heraclitus here. You went into him earlier, and he shows that disturbances is actually a sine qua non, an absolute predisposition for permanence. It is true with the Norwegian coastline, and it's true for the trees in the biosphere of Texas. Also, we humans, we know it's necessary for us to get the so-called child diseases like measles. If we don't get that, the system will weaken. The bacteria is sort of needed. The Romans actually died of measles. So by exposures during centuries, we have grown stronger. So measles today is very seldom something grave. It is rather a predisposition for a healthy bodily constitution. Heraclitus says there is life in death, and death in life is not a Jean-Paul Sartre or being existentialist. He's meaning it in a literal sense. Life gets strengthened. All is life then. All is vividness. Put a little pause there and we can continue. Hello and welcome back after the summary. I will now add another dimension to the aspect of gematria and interpretations. Let the text speak by itself is a saying that has become common since Jacques Derrida. Our search for a specific matrix of meaning, of significance, of signs, block the text. We want to define, we want to determine, have origins, and thereby imposing on the text a fixed, time-dependent structure. We see today often a reality judged by the now. How the matrix is formed in modern time. Modernity becomes a forced grid where only few meanings can be allowed in between the holes. Chirality is a way of looking at text and all other things of the universe as being of many things. And it's that diversity that speaks. The text is let to say itself what it means, with all the contextual features of the whole universe, to make it as loud as possible. We mentioned before, the Cartesian system needs to have arrows attached to make for directions, a sort of prosthetic. A prosthetic that we think give the text more, that we arbitrarily add to it. Derrida calls this the supplément, and it is parasitic on the fullness of the text, with all its errors, randomness, diversity, its directions going as to strengthen the vortex. I will first written a little text what chirality is, to give a more introductory note. And it comes originally from chemistry, and it refers to properties of molecules or ions that are not superimposable on their mirror image. So a chirality is not superimposable on its mirror image. In other words, chirality is the property of asymmetry. Chiral molecules are those that have non-superimposable mirror image, called enantiomers. This means that the molecule and its mirror image are not identical and cannot be made to overlap by rotation nor with translation. Many biological molecules, such as amino acids and sugars, are chiral. For example, all naturally occurring amino acids have a specific chirality and occur in the L form, while sugars are typically in the D form. So the biological activity of a chiral molecule depend on its chirality, and this has important implications for drug design and pharmaceuticals. In addition to its importance in chemistry and biochemistry, chirality is also a fundamental concept in physics, particularly in the study of quantum mechanics. The study of chirality in physics has important implications for the behavior of subatomic particles and the properties of materials. Does the universe have chirality functions? Chirality is a property that is observed in many physical systems, including subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, and macroscopic objects. Therefore, it is reasonable to expect that the universe as a whole may exhibit chirality in some form. One example of chirality in the universe is the phenomenon of circular polarization in light. Circularly polarized light is characterized by the rotation of the electric field vector as the light propagates. Circular polarization is a chiral phenomenon because the direction of rotation can be thought of as analogous to the handedness of a chiral molecule. So we can bring the concept where it's easier to understand in molecules that are either D or L, and bring that over to the quantum and physical phenomena of light. Another example of chirality in the universe is the observed preference for the left-handed chirality in the universe building blocks, such as amino acids and sugars. While it's not clear why this preference exists, is thought to be related to the properties of the weak force in particle physics. Overall, the universe appears to exhibit chirality in various forms, and its study continues to provide insight into fundamental physics and chemistry. What about our human bodies? Chirality is also observed in the human body at various levels of organization, from individual molecules to whole organs. Many biological molecules in the body, such as amino acids, sugars, and nucleic acids, have chiral properties. For example, all amino acids found in proteins are left-handed or in the L form, while sugars in the body are in the right-handed or D form. The biological activity of chiral molecule can depend on its chirality, and this has important implications for pharmaceuticals. Chirality is also observed in the structure of many organs and tissues in the body. For example, the human heart is a chiral organ with a distinct left and right side. Do you remember I mentioned earlier that the rhythm of the heart is in itself a chirality? Its handedness is shown in its non-symmetrical sinus curve. Absolutely vital for its purpose and function. Without this handedness of difference, it will not work properly. So it plays a major part in our internal design from the very outstart. Chirality is also observed in the structure of our entire body. Improper chirality in the body can lead to developmental disorders or other health problems. For example, a condition called situs inversus, in which the major organs of the body are mirrored from their normal position, can occur in some individuals. Overall, chirality plays an important role in the structure and function of the human body, and its study continues to provide insights into the workings of biology and medicine. The very handedness in our brain, us having a left turn brain and a right turn brain, this spiraling of the brain brains, so to speak, has been proven to be of utmost importance in our functioning, especially as exposed by the now famed British, Scottish neurologist Ian McGilchrist, who in his now seminal book, The Master and His Emissary, and his later The Matter of Things, has shown that chirality lies at the bottom of thinking. There is a very thin line, actually it's a continuum, between our brain and the tissues of the body called fascia, making the former highly believed idea of an absolute division between mind and body seem like an old wives' tale. The left hemisphere is using meaning, as I mentioned. It's using a grid that is superimposed on the world to get the subjective, personalized meaning of a thing. And it has a close connection to the left hemisphere's inability to get into chirality. Asymmetry is not a thing that it understands. It does not have a proper connection to the living world of fractality, of dimensionality, and I would say of orders, ordinality. It can only see aggregations of things, which is called the cardinal number. In that, order or handedness doesn't play any role. It sort of obliterates the telling differences of the text of the world by not understanding what makes the world be. It's very becoming. Spatiality, what we have around us, is originally a chirality in itself. Handedness is space. Whereas the left hemisphere has a representational space with the often mentioned perpendicular orthogonal system of lines that doesn't have a directionality internally to it. It doesn't have what Derrida, in a recent tone, in an apocalyptic tone recently adopted within philosophy, called force or tremor. the left brain eradicates, obliterates, or erases, I could also call it universalize, the most important handed features of reality. We have discussed this non-understanding is actually an important aspect of the left hemisphere, which makes it possible for it to find small things that are hard to grasp, not really part of reality. We now know that also the right hemisphere has an understanding of language, of the text we mentioned. But its understanding of the text is not reduced to meanings. It's much deeper. It brings in the subject, the reader, into the understanding. And while meaning is also important for the right hemisphere, it goes much further, extending into the spatiality it can sense, the chirality of space and time itself. So its reading is taking in all aspects, and I think for the right hemisphere, Gematria is as pertinent as a superficial, meaning-inclined reading of a text, for instance, or an understanding of the universe, which was also very much excluding, like the Newtonian understanding of the universe, point-like. Not a continuum, but divided time, divided space. In the greater whole, a deepening of understanding can be possible, as we said earlier, when the contradictions and the disturbances are allowed to enter into what is presenting itself, what is the live reality, not an after effect that the left hemisphere and the Newtonian model or the meaning fixating grid of modern understanding of texts. This causes things by itself. It doesn't need meaning. And in that way, it's close to the Norwegian coastline. It would be a rather ridiculous question to say, what is the condensated meaning of the Norwegian coastline? What does it do, as it was only one feature of it? No, its complexity is part and parcel of what it is. It makes it up, and it's composed by two sides to make one. This is an understanding that Heraclitus called the divine force, a higher understanding that becomes possible once we venture deeper into the more complex and disturbed, if you like, features of the reality, which is jagged, it's coarse, it's not symmetrical, correct, nor is it identical, as in the search for an identical meaning. I think the suggestion of Jacques Derrida to exchange intention for iteration is better. It's fractal-like, and think of it this way. Every time you repeat a word, the meaning is slightly off. It differs in time and in place. The meaning of difference, which explains the production of words, but also the understanding. No understanding can come from sameness, which is the goal of meaning. To identify sameness, a bit like identify the arche of the world as atoms having one singular feature, being identical. Something that we already learned in this series is impossible, even something that would destroy understanding and the very integrity of the world itself. We need these deviations. Quantum mechanics is inherently asymmetrical, understood better by the right hemisphere. A hemisphere that has the capacity to take in these contradicting features of the world and getting their understanding from them, making that understanding both deeper and wider, being thereby able to both be specific and universal at the same time. A very important feature of the spiraling, and that it goes to a certain direction, either left or right, using the Latin terms. It has an inherent direction that strengthens from turbulence, as we saw earlier in the text of Briggs and Pete. A vortex, or why not a hurricane, that strengthens and strengthens and gets its stability that can be quite persistent to make it a permanent entity that sort of communicates or speak to the environment. Give me a number series like this. In the left hemisphere take, all these are equals somehow, whatever it means by that. These are atoms. And in some odd way, the order they come in is secondary. This is called cardinality. Cardinal. It's the mass that makes something happen. It is the sheer power of it. This is a mistaken view. The order where it twists to the left or to the right is of all importance in the universe, because that is what decides things. That's the happening. That makes the hurricane move almost islands, whole oceans. And that is also the movement a text can have if we enter into it deeply with our subjective understanding that brings a necessary turbulence, almost like a seed to the text, to make it tell, to have a direction. You can take some comments here.
Chirality makes me think about Escher's drawing hands that I have discussed in our paper. But I wonder what is the everyday applicability of chirality. How can I practice it? That's you should answer that question. Must answer.
Well, chirality comes into the body, and this is a little known understanding. For instance, the fascia, with this odd spelling, coming from Latin, and it means collection of straws, straw collection, used by the Romans as a symbol that put an axe into it and used strings around it, spirally woven. Fascia is the involvement, listen here, involvement of our whole body into a chirality, a spirality. If we allow more the chiral thinking, if you want, or ordinal thinking, to let, for instance, in our bodies, the head come down slightly, as I said, the primary control, which is the first twist for everything else to be possible. That will make your body spiral, because it is not a box, it is not a lump of heavy flesh like 14 stones of unmovable matter that I every day have to take out of bed and go for a walk with. No, the chirality brings in both thinking and what we call physics. And it does this with fascia. Fascia is not the only thing, but it covers the entirety of the body. And in some aspects, it's one thing. All the way to the fingernails, down to my heel, to my sides, it's one thing. And it's twisted in one way. Understanding that is very helpful for moving, to being balanced. When I, so to speak, zoom in on this, I can feel my body balancing up, and by tilting my head ever so slightly and letting it expand upwards, the spirality of my column, which also is a vortex in itself, will make my body taller, more upright, and thereby both enforcing my thinking, my mind attitude, my Stimmung if you like, and my physical constitution, my demeanor. So to make it milder, my movement becomes softer. It is not like the people and some institutions that break the tip of the filter pen, because their movements are not spiral, they are forced. They're too hard, too gross, but also our thinking is at the very same time participating in this, which makes for coarse thinking. I have been starting to notice myself that the demeanor over the day is very changeable, especially in the morning before coffee. Thoughts produced then are hard, not fractal, but rather like blocks, burdening the thinking, making it heavy. Thoughts does not come at ease. I have to force memories to come to the fore. The easiness of this more spiral thinking is fantastic. Instead of almost whipping your soul as it was a donkey, the things will come to you automatically without you having to put them forward or order them. I can expand your question to involve the hemispheres if you like. The left hemisphere is the dogmatic, dictatorial side. It doesn't see shades. It doesn't understand depth nor tonality. It is this part of the brain that goes for text understanding today, sadly. It didn't used to be the case, but it is today. And it obstructs the understanding of meaning. If I mean meaning, what a text really carries, not the superficial, institutionalized, fossilized concepts of meaning. I mean true meaning. Truth is not a definition way. That wider, smoother thinking is more of the right hemisphere, taking in more of the text, not eradicating it or chlorinizing it, ridding it of its natural, normal features. This way of doing it with a meaning in this dogmatic way is a bit like cutting a dog like a poodle into a circus. I often see when they have huge fur balls at what is supposed to be the tail and the ears. It looks too synthetic, unnatural. Slowly we are getting there when we can understand what is nature by a program that soon finds out if something is oversimplified. Oversimplified here can mean that it doesn't tell as much. It is not as pertinent, decisive for yourself. Such a text becomes attenuated, less, not as messaging, not as gospel-like when it comes to the Bible, not as forceful when it comes to any other saying or text, detonalized. Less of it. Less of it because it needs to fit into this pre-made structure, forced on it, like the left hemisphere forces ourselves to get out of bed. We no longer volunteer. My thoughts are no longer thankful, as Heidegger would say. I have to whip them into existence. And of course, chirality also brings to forth creativity of thinking. It's often called a clearer thinking, a chiral thinking, because it uses nature's own devices. It uses what is at hand, which is much better than this rather limited way. Any more comments? I don't want to force comments on your left-handedness.
No, it's still very abstract. How do you use it in everyday life, so to say? So the principle chirality is that my left hand, or this part, would correspond to my right leg. But okay, it works in theory, but how do I apply it? That's the question. I don't know. Perhaps things that come later. I don't know. Sometimes understanding is that it's not. Now I understand. It's perhaps it will perhaps one day drop. Yes, that this has this side has more in common with this side and with this side. It might be so. So that's my very very humble comment.
Well, thank you for that. Yes, it takes time. A couple of weeks ago I had this sudden shudder in my body, and I realized that something with my toes had a deep connection to my right shoulder, next to my left toes. It was a quivering in my whole body, and when it came to calmness again, I was better poised. And that took time. You need to feel it as well to make it, as you say, less abstract. But this is a start reaching out to the intellectual life, and then I think it will, by time, it will sort of simmer down to our bodily everyday thinking. Once we've taken the guard off, so to speak, we don't vehemently, as these people need to understand chirality before they can even open up. Putting down the defense line of the fixated left hemisphere. Apparently, once convinced, the left hemisphere can be put aside voluntarily by itself, once it's understand its bigger picture, or where it itself should be situated. And I think I end there, and we have another guest. I say thank you very much for your comments, and have a very, well, the rest of the morning. Bye bye.
Thank you.